Welcome, everyone, to TGS, Transform, Grow, Succeed. And this YouTube channel is about your work as a caring professional and the ideas that we can share to elevate and expand what we do to ensure that everybody that we serve gets the very best of what we have to offer, including ourselves. And I'm excited, thrilled, honestly, to introduce Dr. Ross Greene, creator of Collaborative and Proactive Solutions, CPS, and also founder of Lives in the Balance. And CPS is a model for problem-solving issues that come up when unexpected behaviors seem unsolvable. Dr. Greene is the author of The Explosive Child and Lost in Schools, two transformational books that I believe are essential resources to anyone whose job involves working with children and youth. And Dr. Ross, I'm wondering, what else might you add?
Oh my goodness, we don't have to add anything else. Lives in the balance is the big part.
Excellent. Well, licenthebalance.org is, and having checked it out myself, is a fantastic resource to anybody certainly anybody who works with me and the work with behavior interventions that we've been doing for years, but anybody who works with children and youth absolutely needs to check out the resources there for sure. And honestly, I would recommend checking out The Explosive Child and Lost in Schools as well. And so I'm just wondering, and I have a tendency to oversimplify things. May I call you Russ?
Of course.
Okay, Russ. So one of the things that I have a tendency to do is oversimplify things just a bit. And one of the things that's always surprised me as an educator, I've worked in schools for many, many years, as a teacher, an assistant principal, district leader. Now I do a lot of work with schools supporting building systems for behavior interventions, and we go about it in a really different way. Is this idea that maybe if we're designing behavior supports for someone, we should perhaps involve them in the process. Uh, I mean, and it just seems like that would be a really kind of normal sort of thing to do, but it just really isn't. And I find a lot of times that this is a very new idea, and it takes a lot of just loving kindness and walking side by side with very caring educators who haven't really, thought that we need to do this.
Mhm.
I'm wondering why might that be?
Well, I don't think we train educators to collaborate with kids
Hmm.
on solving the problems that are causing their concerning behaviors.
Mhm.
And I think that we have a lot of structures in place that have adults making decisions for kids, adults deciding what's making it hard for a kid to meet an expectation, adults deciding what to do about it. So between how we train people and the structures that have been in place for a very long time, I don't think those things make it easy for us to collaborate with kids on solving the problems that are causing their concerning behaviors.
So really just in kind of coming back to the way that folks who work with kids are trained, we're trained in a very adult-centered perspective, which I guess kind of makes sense. It's adults in these training programs, adults running them. But when it comes down to practice, answering the question of why a student is always running out of the classroom or why a student is always flipping a desk, the person with the most information is often left out of that process. And I'm wondering just what led you originally even just to develop collaborative and proactive solutions just as a model? And is this essentially kind of the problem that you were trying to solve?
Well, yes. Um, what I was finding as a behaviorally trained clinical psychologist is that this is interesting. On this part, you and I might not see eye to eye. We'll find out. I found that focusing on behavior and trying to modify it was the wrong focal point. Um, I've been saying for a long time that the concerning behavior is late.
Hmm.
It occurs after an expectation that a kid is having difficulty meeting,
Hmm.
meaning that the concerning behavior, you know the cliche, all behaviors are communication. Concerning behavior is communicating that a kid is having difficulty meeting a particular expectation. And what I discovered, I guess, stumbled upon more like it, is that focusing on the expectations kids were having difficulty meeting, whether it's difficulty coming back into the classroom after recess, difficulty completing the double-digit division problems on the worksheet in math, difficulty coming to school. Um, it was those things that were causing concerning behaviors. And I was seeing that if all we were focused on is modifying the behaviors, the problems that were causing them never got solved.
Hmm.
And so we have lots of kids in our schools, but also everywhere, who've had just gobs of behavior management,
Hmm.
right? gobs of behavior modification, gobs of having replacement behaviors, taught and retaught, gobs of checking in and checking out about behavior, right? I think we've been focused on the wrong thing. Think that, and that has made us late a lot because the concerning behavior is late, which is why crisis management is so popular in schools. Because if you don't solve the problems that are causing the kids' concerning behaviors, the concerning behaviors are going to occur, and people are going to feel like they need crisis management.
Mhm.
I don't think we need crisis management anywhere nearly as much as people think we do. But if we want to get out of the crisis management business, if we want to stop being late, we have to start focusing on what's early, which
Mhm.
is what we call unsolved problems and solving them. And a huge part, then I'll shut up, a huge part of the problem solving process is engaging the kids because it's solving problems collaboratively, right? Our number one source of information on what's making it hard for a kid to meet a particular expectation in this model is the kid. So
Mhm.
it's built into this model, but it's not built into a lot of training. It's not built into a lot of structures. And I find that when you ask a kid why they did XYZ behavior, the most common response is going to be, I don't know.
Mhm.
But if you say to the kid, I've noticed you've been having difficulty completing the double digit division problems on the worksheet in math, what's causing the concerning behavior? You're going to get information.
And I think that's what's really neat is that there's been a pretty big evolution, honestly, in my own thinking and approach to a lot of these things, just based from what my own experience was being a first year teacher, onto now actually having to think through these things in real time as a school leader and supporting teachers, and certainly now in the work that I do in professional development and creating inclusive classrooms for kids with ADHD is one of the biggest things that I do. But it really is kind of that. And so what I was, as I was sort of rereading Lost at School, which I read like back in what I think it was published 2008. I think I read it in 2010. So a long time ago, honestly. But I just finished re-listening to it this week, just thinking, oh, I talk a lot about like unmet needs that we need to talk about before we get to even addressing behaviors. That's probably different in many ways in what you mean by unsolved problems,
Yes.
but still in just this idea that there's a lot that we got to get to before we start talking about sticker charts or consequences or things like that.
And I never talk about sticker charts or consequences because they're not problem solving strategies.
They are not.
But but
They are
there's a
not.
lot of things we got to get to also before we start talking about tiers.
Hmm.
For me, tiers are who's doing what, right? You can't talk about who's doing what until you know what you got,
Yeah.
right? That comes before we start talking about whether this kid has a disability
Wait, so
and
Dr. Ross, are you
qualifies for
saying that
special ed.
perhaps we don't need a three-tiered color-coded triangle to meet a kid's needs?
Blasphemy.
Oh my goodness. And so this is wow, this is going to be a very delicious conversation. And I feel like I'm talking to the right person. Because it's one of the, so, and in just a little bit, I'm about to present just to an amazing group of school social workers. And one of the, like this, the perhaps professionally sassy comments that I might have is this next slide is where you're going to expect to see a three-tiered triangle, but we're not going to be doing that. And and we'll have it. I only talk about them to explain why we don't need them. But I'm curious, just okay. So we're way. This is a delicious spot. So let's just hang out here for just a bit. So we've got kids. They have unsolved problems, and
Right.
any child absolutely might. What is it about the a color coded triangle that doesn't really get us to where we need to go?
Well, if that color-coded triangle is the color-coded triangle of PBIS,
Most likely,
then we will be focused on B, behavior. And now you just lost me.
yeah, yeah.
If the color-coded triangle is MTSS, the offshoot of PBIS and RTI, you may not necessarily be talking about behavior, but you are talking about who's doing what. That's all the color-coded triangle tells you,
Mhm.
right? Like, so, and I wasn't raised on tiers, right? So it's not sort of my native tongue. But as someone who wasn't raised on tiers, um, if we're even going to start talking about tiers, it's way after we've identified the kid's unsolved problems, way after we've checked in with the kid about what's making it hard for them to meet those expectations. Tiers should not be the main thing that we're talking about, right? What are this kid's unsolved problems? What's getting in their way? All right, now we can start thinking about, can what's getting in their way be managed in general ed, tier one? Can it be managed in a group, tier two? Can it be managed individually, tier three? There's a lot of things people do at tier three that could be done at tier one, right? So the whole tier thing just sort of really doesn't make a lot of sense to me. Um, what's getting in this kid's way? Kid's voice, focusing on problems, not behaviors.
Mhm.
To tell you the truth, I honestly think we'd get rid of a lot of special ed referrals if we were front loading what I just said instead of having the conversation be about tiers and disabilities.
Mhm. Mhm. And this is one of the things too that there's a lot of mental gymnastics, I think, now around the idea of tiers and color-coded triangles and things like that. And there's a lot of reasons why it just seems like a very, maybe when it was invented 60 years ago, it was an avant-garde, really revolutionary idea and was helpful to move thinking along in some respects. But at this point, we should know better, by now. It just seems like we have enough data to know a whole lot better. And namely, just this idea that the assumption that we can build a system in advance that absolutely knows what every single student needs without talking to them
Oh my
just
God.
it seems a little bit like using psychic powers and kind of educational astrology. But that's well, thank you for giving me that chance to say to talk to say that out loud because it's been a minute. So, but I do think to these going back to just really just your work, and this is what I was just really excited about. Um, what kind of is that big difference, that big huge thing that happens when we move from this thing of, oh my goodness, we have a student with some really big unexpected behaviors that are happening that are really just challenging what we're trying to get done in a school day. We need to address it somehow, some way. So let's all meet in a small group, come up with a plan, then tell the child what the plan is, and be shocked that it's not received well. But we always kind of expect that it works, and it kind of doesn't usually work so well. What really is this the magic then of, because another way of thinking about it is, am I really going to ask a 6 year old why they're having difficulty in making transitions? There was, and I'm going to say this in perhaps a different kind of way. One time when I was having a conversation, I'm not going to pretend like I knew CPS inside and out, but it was inspired by your book. I will say that,
Good.
where I was talking with a 6 year old about just some escaping in the classroom that was happening a lot. It's like, huh, you seem to be out of the classroom a whole lot. I'm wondering what's outside that's so cool. And the student, the 6 year old said, I'm just a kid. I don't know. That is exactly what the 6 year old said to me. And it was kind of interesting. And I have a hunch that I know how we might work with that situation, but I'm wondering because there's a lot of folks that are like, why would I ask a 6 year old why they're doing these giant explosive behaviors? They clearly don't know.
Well, I wouldn't say that the behaviors are unexpected. I think these are very predictable kids.
Mhm.
Are there random unexpected behaviors? Yes. But the unsolved problems that kids are struggling with, most of them are old.
Mhm.
I always say that an unsolved problem is only a surprise the first time it happens. And remember, an unsolved problem is an unmet expectation.
Mhm.
This isn't the first time Jimmy's had difficulty completing the double-digit division problems on the worksheet in math. Jimmy's been struggling with that for 3 months. I
Mhm.
can't call the concerning behaviors that Jimmy exhibits to communicate that he's having difficulty completing the double-digit division problems on the worksheet in math unexpected. So the first thing we've got to do for people is number one, get them to stop focusing on the concerning behaviors. That's just the
Mhm.
frustration response. Next thing we got to do is help them start identifying the unsolved problems.
Mhm.
Because as we always say, if you do not identify the problems proactively, you will never solve them proactively.
Mhm.
You will always be stuck in the heat of the moment dealing with the kid's frustration response, their concerning behavior. So this is a huge shift. I think this is what one of the biggest things CPS brings to the table is shifting schools from a focus on behavior to a focus on the problems that are causing those behaviors. And you accurately pointed out earlier, we call those unsolved problems. I find that unmet needs are a little bit more nebulous, sometimes less actionable. There are unmet needs we can do something about. There are unmet needs we can't do anything about. We can always do something about an unsolved problem, an expectation that a student is having difficulty meeting. First, we have to notice, so it's not a surprise.
Hmm.
Then we have to get the kid's voice. And now the only difference, the kid's voice on what's getting in the way and the kid's voice on what the solution could be. The only difference is that there are some kids who have a boatload of unsolved problems.
Hmm.
We've begun calling them high acuity kids, right? We recommend that people use our formal assessment tool called the assessment of skills and unsolved problems because they're going to have a lot of unsolved problems, and we know that already,
Hmm.
right? A lot of those kids are in special ed already. So these are not surprising kids. We know who they are.
Yeah, and just real
So,
quick, Ross, where
sure.
could someone get that the assessment?
They can find it for free on the website of on the Lives in the Balance website.
All right, we'll make sure that is in the show notes so folks have access.
Super. Great. Um, Kids who have fewer, which is kids who are just beginning to struggle, or quite frankly, every student has an expectation they're having difficulty meeting. They just need us to be focused on the expectations they're having difficulty meeting. A lot of them aren't exhibiting concerning behaviors in response to those unmet expectations. We could miss them if we're waiting for the concerning behavior to occur before we notice that there's an expectation they're having difficulty meeting.
Hmm.
So this can be organized in a building with some paperwork changes, but the big shift is behavior to the problems that are causing it.
Hmm.
Beyond that, the problem solving is collaborative,
Hmm.
meaning full involvement of the kid, and best of all, proactive, meaning not in the heat of the moment.
Hmm.
This is probably an old unsolved problem. As I said a minute ago, an unsolved problem is a surprise only the first time it happens. Then it's not a surprise anymore.
So that all of that it makes a lot of sense, right? That if we focus on essentially the symptom of a problem that just hasn't get solved yet, that we're going to be perpetually going back to something and rehashing the same thing in the same kind of unsatisfying, unproductive way that just leads to all kinds of unsolved problems for the adults involved that require lots of energy, time, effort, and everything. When I kind of listen to the example in Lost at School for that could be any student that any of us have ever worked with ever. Honestly, age in grades 0 to 99, we've all had some version of these conversations where they always tend to work pretty well
Yeah,
when we do. Now, a lot of times and I'll just own right real quick that I do a lot of training at PBIS, but I the PBIS police are going to get me sooner or later. And particularly with check in, check out, I think is one of those things where we worked with a school where we've kind of changed. It's not going to be an hourly conversation about your failure to meet our expectations. What it is we're going to set a goal together and is going to be a goal that you like, that seems to make sense for you. And we're going to come up with some ideas that, might make this goal a little bit easier. We're going to predict what might make it a little bit tricky to do. If it goes great, this is the conversation we'll have. If every desk gets flipped and every word gets said, this is the conversation we're going to have, and we're going to love you no matter what. And that's how it's going to go. But one of the parts of it really is training adults to deal with, I don't know, and that being
yes,
the most common response. And I'm thinking
yes.
that as a 44-year-old grown man, if somebody asked me, why I so consistently eat cake, even though I know it's not part of my meal plan, I'm not sure I exactly know either. And I'm not spending that level of like reflection on that problem, is it? I wonder why is it that the I don't knows can be so challenging for school adults when they're working collaboratively with students.
Students aren't accustomed being asked.
Hmm.
They often haven't thought about their concerns for a very long time.
Hmm.
They are accustomed to having adults tell them what's the matter.
Hmm.
They're accustomed to having adults tell them what the solution's going to be.
Mhm.
We aren't giving kids much practice in a lot of places at figuring out what's getting in the way, thinking of what solutions might address what's getting in the way. I don't know is going to be part of every problem-solving conversation we have with a kid. It's sort of the routine, right? It's the norm, right? There are lots of strategies,
Yeah.
lots. Because the kid's voice is so critical in this model, um, we have lots of strategies for what to do if we run into a bump in the road in terms of gathering information from a kid, right? I think the reason a lot of caregivers don't know what to do is because they're not necessarily accustomed to asking the kid, right? So the kid's not accustomed to being asked. We're not accustomed to asking. Seems like a big hole there in terms of, a skill set. Um, I have so much faith in the strategies that we use in this model to extract information from kids.
Mhm.
I never worry about a kid not talking. And I don't know is just a bump in the road. There's lots of things we can do with I don't know. I don't know is not something to be scared of.
It's one of those things too. I say the same when I'm working with schools to train coaches and how to, there's it's definitely not your process at all, but there's some things that are analogous to it. Just the idea of making sure that we are coming up with a plan collaboratively with the student to be successful in the way that they actually care about, and we're not going to be addressing any kind of thing that they don't. Because as far as I haven't met the human being that works really, really hard on things they don't care about, really. Like it just doesn't, I don't know. Maybe you have, I haven't yet. But dealing with that I don't know. It really is. I wonder if it's that element of collaboration that sometimes we're forgetting about. That it's okay for kids not to know things, and it's okay for us to have different levels of information, and we're kind of partnering in this process. And it's okay to supply an idea and give it a try and talk about how it went. Like it's there's nothing catastrophic about that. We're it's so long as it's real clear that we're always going to be youth led as much as possible. I will say that there are actually some real specific and really neat kind of like language frames in Lost at School that I would definitely encourage folks to pick up on. And just over the years, I sort of on accident, I think anyone who does this work kind of develops their own. But you've really summarized them and made them so super simple that you're not like memorizing a script exactly. You're just more memorizing kind of the beginning of a thought. I'm wondering, like, and I guess I'm asking a lot about the I don't knows because that just has been in the last 3 months the biggest issue in kind of implementing a child-led approach to behavior intervention that I've noticed among the schools that I've worked with. What is kind of like some of your favorites that seem to
Favorites?
always? I mean, I know they don't always work, but just the ones that are kind of come first to mind.
Well, first of all, I've got a leg up because I'm not asking kids about their behavior.
Yeah.
I find that if you ask a kid about their concerning behavior, more often than not, they're going to think they're in trouble. They're going to become defensive. They're not talking to you. I think you greatly heighten the likelihood of I don't know if you're talking with kids about their concerning behavior. So that's a big piece, right? But if I say to a kid, I've noticed you've been having difficulty completing the double-digit division problems on the worksheet in math, what's up? And they say, I don't know. The first thing I'm going to say is take your time, no rush. Um, I'd rather hear it from you, right? Sometimes that gets me there.
Mhm.
Um,
Now, for a
sometimes I'll,
classroom teacher to be able to say, take your time, that requires usually another human being stepping in to give that classroom teacher time. And
no
that at
question
least,
about it.
yeah, and so that's one of those things too. Actually, I think you even mentioned it specifically in the book that if you that I'm going to get to this in just a second. But the first thing just is number one, just don't focus on something that no one wants to talk about. Who wants to have a conversation about their
Well,
behaviors? But the
but
next
I,
thing is allow a student some time to think, for goodness sakes.
for sure. I mean, I think that's what we're trying to develop in our schools is thinkers.
Hmm.
Uh, Thinking doesn't always happen in a nanosecond. And if I come up with something in a nanosecond, I probably don't trust it because
Hmm.
I would rather think about it a little. But a few strategies. If a kid says, I don't know, we have license to guess, I save that for the end,
Hmm.
right? First, I'd rather give the kid time. I might reassure the kid that they're not in trouble. I'm not mad at them. Often, it is a very good idea. This is good practice, period, to tell the kid in advance what it is that you'd like to talk about, that's something you'd like to understand better, right? Tell them what it is. Otherwise, even though you might be having the conversation proactively, you're still springing the subject on them,
Mhm.
right? Some strategies. But ultimately, I might say to the kid, do you not know what you want to say? Or do you know what you want to say, but you're not sure how to say it? That sometimes helps me get my bearings. Worst case scenario, right? And by the way, we do this with non-speaking kids.
Mhm.
So a kid who's simply saying, I don't know, actually doesn't represent a major challenge. It's just something we've got to know what to do with,
Yeah.
right? I'll guess. If a kid won't even respond to my guesses verbally, I'll teach the kid five fingers. Five means very true. Four, this is too simple.
Yeah.
Five means very true. Four means pretty true. Three means sort of true. Two means not very true. One means not true at all.
Mhm.
Then I'll make my guess, and all the kid's got to do is hold up fingers to let me know how true my guess is. This is why I say, number one, we are going to hear the kid's voice.
Yeah.
And number two, if the kid says, I don't know, or goes silent on us, or becomes defensive, or says they don't want to talk about it right now, or says they don't have a problem with it, or they don't care, these are all expected responses, right? I find that sometimes when people implement something new, they think it's going to be magical. No, talking to kids can be magical at some point, but it often can be very hard work. There can be bumps in the road. It can be messy. But ultimately, we're going to find out from the kid what's making it hard for them to meet the expectation because we know that if we don't, whatever solution we come up with probably isn't going to work.
And it also, I think, getting started with a process like this requires a level of humility that might be hard sometimes for school adults to have. You know, the assumption that we literally might have no idea what's going on inside someone's mind and our heart until they tell us. Like we really might, and we might have all the years of experience in the world, but we've only experienced this child right now, and that's today's job, and that's it's. I wonder, does that connect at all with why this might be
Totally.
hard for some folks?
But I think of it less a humility issue, although I think humility helps.
Hmm.
Um, I guess I'm humble every time I go into a problem solve. Humble wouldn't be the word I'd use, but I would like to think I'm humble every time I go into a problem solving conversation because I'm acknowledging I have no idea what's getting in the kid's way on this unsolved problem. My job is to find out. It's not my job to know. But the reason I think it might not be only humility is that I think it's a lot of it's about training.
Hmm.
Anybody who's trained is trained to know.
Hmm.
This is every profession, right? Educators are trained to know, physicians are trained to know, mental health professionals are trained to know we're wrong a lot, right? Um, better to go to the source, better to go straight to the source. Isn't this interesting? You're saving time by going to the person who many people think of as your least excellent source of information. The kid. The kid is your most excellent source of information.
But
Go
Ross, I have to
straight
be
to
honest,
it.
I've never believed that and I've never understood it. And I found myself so alone in this for so long, to be honest, until I read your book. But like this is so but you're correct. Like I'm sorry. Because what you're saying is absolutely correct. But it is that the best person to help us here is the person who's experiencing the issue. And I just can't help somebody learn a thing until I know what's on their mind. And it's
And by the way, there aren't many school structures to support that. If
mm-mm.
that's happening now, it's because an individual educator thinks it's a good idea. I think we need to structure it. This is what we do in this building.
Mhm.
Before we do anything, before we think about any tier, before we think about any disability, we're asking the kid. That is not part of the existing structure in most schools.
Now, I would say the closest that I've ever seen to it, honestly, and I'm just going to shout it out, is the amazing work at Orange Grove Middle School, where there's an expectation that before we assign a consequence to a student, we have a conversation with them, and what is included in that conversation is spelled out. And it wasn't even a principle-driven thing. It was very much the staff having all these unsatisfying conversations with students and realizing that we kind of needed to do something a certain way. And asking the student what's on their mind is step two. Step one is breathe. Like actually breathe before we cross the room. Take a breath. Then we can have this conversation. But so I guess so that actually I think would be a really interesting thing. And you know what? Why don't we take a break right now, and maybe we can come back. Let's talk about that because there are structures in place that are doing something at every school about behavior. And so if we're gonna have a collaborative, proactive, problem-solving way of going about doing stuff, it's probably going to need to be structural. And I'd be curious to see your thoughts on what that would look like.
Great.
This is Dr. Tim, and I'm excited and absolutely going to encourage everybody to check out Lives in the Balance as an exceptional resource for going beyond traditional behavior interventions, which we all know just aren't working. The truth is, when we're focused only on managing behaviors, we miss the real opportunity to help kids thrive. And that's where Lives in the Balance can really help support us in what we do every single day and living out our values in classrooms. Founded by Dr. Ross Greene, Lives in the Balance is a nonprofit organization dedicated to transforming the way that we understand and support children with challenging behaviors. And their collaborative and proactive solutions, CPS model, is built on a simple but powerful idea. Kids do well if they can. And when our expectations are outstripping the skills they've got, behavior is just the signal, not the actual problem we need to solve. Lives in Balance provides free resources, training, and support for educators, for parents, and for caregivers who want to move beyond punishment and rewards and to start solving problems with kids instead of for them. Now, if you're ready to rethink discipline and create some lasting change, livesinthebalance.org is an amazing place to start because you're going to find everything you need to get started, including tools, webinars, and a community of people who are working towards the same goal. Check out livesinthebalance.org. All right, everyone. Well, welcome back. We're here talking with Dr. Ross Greene, who is the founder of Lives in the Balance and has just spent decades of professional work in supporting schools and doing better by kids whose behavior seems really challenging, seems really unexpected. But when we can get to the root of the unsolved problems that are leading to this, it's honestly maybe not as hard as the solutions that we're currently implementing. Now, here's the thing. Across the United States, if I were to say what is the structure that schools are using to support positive behavior in their schools, it would be positive behavior intervention and supports. And honestly, it's one of the biggest reasons why schools give me a call in the first place, or districts give me a call in the first place, is to help build a positive behavior intervention and support framework. So I'm wondering, how does the collaborative problem-solving model connect or not with what you have experienced as a traditional PBIS framework?
Well, you can implement collaborative and proactive solutions within the three tiers.
Mm-hmm.
My attitude, though, is the tiers have to become very secondary.
Mm-hmm.
Because as we've said, the tiers mostly tell you who's doing what. We can't know who's doing what until we start solving problems with kids. So this is interesting. There's two parts to PBIS.
Mm-hmm.
There's the structure, three tiers, and there's the interventions.
Mm-hmm.
Which we can't forget, PBIS is a descendant of the applied behavior analytic tradition. It's no accident that the interventions of PBIS are focused on behavior. You just lost me.
Mm-hmm.
We're not having conversations with kids in the CPS model about consequences. That's not a conversation we have. We have conversations with kids about what's making it hard for them to meet a particular expectation
Mm-hmm.
and what some potential solutions can be. Consequences are never a solution. Consequences are not a problem-solving strategy. They are a behavior modification strategy. So the big piece of advice from me is make the tiers secondary. If PBIS has been pushing you to focus on behavior, stop. Focus on the problems that are causing those behaviors. You can do that within the three tiers. So structurally, the tiers are for me, whatever. Um, Focusing on behavior, you just lost me. So that piece of PBIS, trouble, right? Tiers, less trouble, but far less of a big deal than people have been making of it. That's the thing, right? Let's identify the kids' unsolved problems. What tier are we at? Any tier. Let's figure out what's making it hard for the kid to meet a particular expectation. What tier is that? Any tier. Let's figure out what potential solutions would be and whether, as part of our solutions, but by the way, what tier is this? Any tier. Let's figure out if any of our pool of resources, some of which are only available through special ed, we might call that the deep end, some of which are available in general ed through MTSS or whatever. That's the shallow end. And shallow and deep doesn't mean anything except it's two ends of the pool, right? Um,
And just how expensive the intervention is going to be. That's really all it means. Like,
that's
at least in
correct.
my view.
Correct.
Who's involved?
Let's figure out if anything we have to offer would be a solution to what we now know is getting in the kid's way, right? What tier is that? Any tier.
Hmm.
Um, do we have to call it tier two if it's this intervention over here? If you have to, call it that, but whatever, right? Do we have to call it tier three if it's special ed? If you have to, but what did we just add to the conversation? Nothing. The reason PBIS has become ubiquitous in American public schools is because the United States Department of Education has been funding it and pushing it for a very long time. That's why.
And it's one of those things where like there's certain aspects of PBIS that are hard to argue with. Is just that, well, yeah, we should probably like have some idea of what we actually want to see in terms of school values and how we live those values out loud for sure. I have to agree that I'm not sure we really add much to the conversation when we label it red, yellow, or green. And if anything, we add, in my view, like we add a lot of ableist connotations to things that really get in the way of solving the problems that we want. So here's the thing is that I'm in a very weird position as a person who does gobs of PBIS training and believes the things that I do. Like honestly, I have both people follow my Instagram account, the folks that are just all about ABA in every kind of way. And just for full disclosure, my partner, who's a beautiful human being inside and out, is studying to be a board certified behavior analyst. And the spicy conversations we have all the time, it's just hilarious. He'll often say, "Hey, I'll unmute you right now, and Dr. Tim Gravoy can explain his thoughts on this to the professor if you'd like." Oh no, but they have those folks that follow my account, and then I have other folks that want to burn PBIS to the ground, and we seem to be getting along great. But I'm not sure that's sustainable. And where I've sort of done the mental gymnastics now is okay, let's forget about tiers. Let's make them secondary, like you said. Let's just focus on building systems that meet student needs. And let's not really
Correct.
worry about calling it a thing. We'll just worry about what seems to be the first thing to build if it's not built yet, and then the second thing to build if we haven't built yet. And then once it's built, we don't even need to worry about tiers. We just do the thing that seems to kind of work, and that feels like right. I don't know how does that strike you?
Strikes me as absolutely right. Let's front load the stuff that should be front loaded,
Hmm.
identify unsolved problems, decide on the acuity of this kid and how fast we need to move, start prioritize those unsolved problems because some kids are going to have a boatload of them because they've
Hmm.
never been identified or solved,
Hmm.
right? Figure out what the kid needs based largely on what the kid is telling us about what's getting in their way.
Hmm.
Start matching up what we have to offer with what the kid needs, right? Did you notice and I think you did too, nowhere in there did I say anything about a tier. Now, do all that first, right? And if you still find three tiers to be useful, go for it. But look how secondary it was. Look how late it was, right? If you still find it to be useful, God bless you, right? If you don't, fine, you don't need the tiers. We've made such a big deal out of tiers when I don't think tiers are really helping anybody, educators included, all that much. Tiers tell us who's doing what. That's pretty much it.
So I had to get a thought on that just for a second. So a lot of times we're talking about an individual student and the unsolved problems that they might have. A lot of times, kind of the big structural school-wide frameworks for problem solving will say, all right, well, what if we actually have a group of students that seem to be having a similar unsolved problem? Is there a school-wide way that we could approach this? Now, PBIS would say, sure, we're just going to develop interventions and tell the kids what we're doing. I mean, and to be, I mean, that's kind of what we would do. I wonder how might this look in like a collaborative problem solving approach?
Well, we can't call it collaborative problem solving, but we can call it collaborative and proactive solutions. Uh,
Excuse me, collaborative practice solutions. Yes,
no
absolutely.
worries. It's a long story. But here's the thing to remember. If it's a problem that affects the entire school,
Hmm.
we could try to we would want to get kid input on what's going on there, right? Say it's the food is lousy in the cafeteria, right? I wouldn't change the menu until we ask the kids,
Hmm.
right? And one of the key mantras of the CPS model, we've been dancing around it, but one of the key mantras of the CPS model is ask the kid. The other is don't be late, right? Two mantras. They take people very far, right? If I wanted to make the food better in the cafeteria, I'm asking the kids first,
Hmm.
right? Here's the thing to remember though. If many kids in a classroom have the same unsolved problem, let's say everybody's having difficulty completing the double-digit division problems on the worksheet in math, right? We could have a group discussion that is collaborative. I've done that many times, right? There's actually a great video on the Lives in the Balance website of full class Plan B on an unsolved problem that affected the entire class. But it's also possible that different kids are having difficulty with the double-digit division problems on the worksheet in math
Hmm.
for different reasons. And here's differentiation coming at you, right? Might need different solutions. So I think that there are some class-wide problems that would be well handled as a group, the unsolved problems that do affect the group as a whole. And there are some unsolved problems that may still need to be individual because it might not be the same solution that addresses what's getting in the way for each kid.
So it is possible to use the collaborative practice solutions approach, and for more than one, if there's an unsolved problem that's affecting more folks. Also, we have this beautiful chance for differentiation because we are very likely to discover that the reason for these problems is not going to be the same child by child. Um,
Correct.
and
And why would we think that it would be the same reason? I wouldn't.
it's I think anybody with any range of experience in the classroom knows it hardly ever is. And it just seems like for efficiency's sake, it's so much easier to glom onto the thing that seems like it's going to meet everybody's needs, kinda, rather than no, we're going to solve this problem so it stays solved kid by kid by kid, so that the rest of my year is so much different than perhaps what I'm currently experiencing now. And it's just making me think of like when I first became a principal, I had a kindergarten lunch was first, fifth grade lunch was last. All of the fifth grade boys were running to be as fast as they could, first in line. And I can only tell this story because I learned a little bit. And but for a solid 3 weeks, my solution was yelling at them more. It really was. It was standing out in the hallway and just yelling at them more so that they would just see me, the authority figure, and not want to run so fast until it just finally dawned on me, like, why? Why are we doing this, kids? And like, oh yeah, everybody eats the pizza. There's nothing but salad left over on Fridays. Oh, that is such a much simpler problem that involves a lot less of my time. We can absolutely make sure that there's pizza for you. That is not a problem. And it was
And
just, yeah, I'm
and
embarrassed that it took me so long, and it would have taken me no time at all if I just asked.
a big lesson learned is coming down hard doesn't solve anything.
It sure doesn't, and it honestly doesn't feel good. Like at least not to me, and not to most of my colleagues, honestly. So. Dr. Ross, this was an absolute pleasure just to have this conversation with you. And if I could just beg of your patience for just one more question,
Sure.
I'm just wondering, thinking about this just at the structural level, that realistically, when the way that most schools right now are structured is that there is a site leader who's going to be more or less in charge of the initiatives that are happening there. Of course, there's superintendents and principals have bosses too that they got to make happy. But generally speaking, if something structurally is going to happen at a school, it's going to be a site leader who does it. It's going to
Yep.
be a principal or headmaster of some kind who does this kind of change.
Right.
If somebody's thinking about this and they kind of like, you know what? Yeah, the reason why I've got so many kids in my office is we're not actually solving any problems here. We're only focusing on behaviors. What are the common first steps, the do it now things that somebody who wants to make that shift might want to do?
Familiarize yourself with the CPS model in one way or another. That can be done through a book study with my book Lost at School. That's not me selling books, it's just a good way to start.
Oh, I'll sell your book. I think it's fantastic. I would absolutely recommend that folks read that. It's transformational.
It could be, if you don't want to buy a book, the guided tour on the Lives in the Balance website for
Mhm,
educators is a wonderful introduction to the model. So, step number one is familiarize yourself with the CPS model, right?
mhm,
Immerse yourself a little bit. Take an hour or two to learn about how things could be better in your school,
mhm.
right? Then take the next step. Um, the next step usually is contact Lives in the Balance. Let's help you get a few champions in your school, a few people who are learning the model first, right? Um, let's get the ball rolling.
Mhm.
Then let's get a lot of people trying to do the model with the people who know what they're doing, um, coaching them along if they need it, right? So a lot of things are done in schools this way, right? Um, but familiarize yourself with the model first. Um, contact Lives in the Balance will help you get there, and
Mhm.
it's not going to cost you an arm and a leg to do it.
Do you have some resources, just as friends who are listening right now and hopefully really excited about the opportunity to just take a different approach that's going to work a whole lot better? And honestly, I would definitely agree with Dr. Rossi. Read the book, whatever way of learning is going to work for you. Just find that and find that support, and it's
Right.
not going to be as expensive as you think it's going to be. But if and I don't, I'm curious to see how you would think about this. The Another additional suggestion that I might have is perhaps give it a try and
Right.
try it out sooner than later.
Correct. Don't
Yeah.
don't put the book down and say that was a good book and then put it
Yeah.
on your shelf and that's the end of it. You then got to start doing it. And if you're a building leader, you are energizing people and galvanizing them to do it. You're organizing the effort a little bit. We were talking about structures. Sometimes they come later,
Mhm.
but you've got to build it first. And this is not a one fell swoop deal. So familiarize, try, build capacity. That's the way we've always done it.
And even just thinking about that collaborative approach from the get-go is if it perhaps I would not necessarily recommend that a super excited principal simply decide that everybody is doing this way and decide that in August we are completely changing everything. We probably would want to have some of those champions and staff who've had a chance to build some success with this and feel good about this. It just kind of noting how sometimes I'm have been asked to do trainings in that kind of other way that are perhaps less collaborative, and I'm in a room full of people who don't want to be there. But that's but I'll tell you what though, I just it just is absolutely refreshing. It's just like jumping into a cold pool in the best possible way, honestly. Just to just have a conversation about the voice that is most often missing in this process, and we are definitely, at least I am, working with schools that feel like they're getting their arms around bigger and bigger crises that that yes, it's happening, but it's not happening for the reasons that we think, and the common people and reasons that we want to blame just are kind of tired at this point. And so we owe it to ourselves to include a voice that's been missing, in my view, for a very long time. And so, Dr. Greene, thank you so much for being here today, for sharing your experience for our listeners. To our listeners, I hope you enjoyed our show. I hope you reach out to me or to Dr. Greene with your thoughts in our conversation. You can reach Dr. Greene at his livesinthebalance.org,
Correct.
livesinthebalance.org. And you can also get Lost in School and the Explosive Child pretty much anywhere. But I'll make sure that there's links to where I get my books, where I get those books in the show notes for sure. And I definitely recommend those. And just to everybody, as always, may you have as many opportunities to be as good and kind to yourself as you are with those that you serve.